They never thought it would happen to them. In fact, just the week before, Mark had been leaning against the hood of an old sedan in the repair shop, complaining to his coworker Dave about how life just went on in a predictable loop. Paycheck to paycheck, bills stacking up, nothing exciting ever happening. He'd laughed bitterly, saying, "I swear, I could predict the rest of my life with my eyes closed." But that Friday morning, the universe decided to prove him wrong. By the end of the day, Mark and his wife Laura would make a decision that would shock everyone who knew them. They would win the lottery and walk away from everything's jobs, responsibilities, and even family ties. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The kind of evening where the sky is already dark by the time you leave work, and your body feels heavier than it should. Mark's hands were sore, his fingernails stained with grease from a stubborn brake job that had taken longer than expected. He stopped by a small convenience store on his way home, not because he wanted to, but because they were out of bread, and Laura liked to have it for breakfast. Inside, the store smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning chemicals. He grabbed a bottle of water and a loaf of bread, then stood in line behind a woman buying a pack of cigarettes. His eyes wandered to the counter, where a bright display of lottery tickets sat. The colors were almost mocking in their cheerfulness. He glanced at the sign above it. Jackpot, $148 million. Mark chuckled under his breath. He'd always told himself he would never waste money on something like that. Yet, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he reached into his pocket, pulled out 2 crumpled bills, and bought a single ticket. When he walked through the door that night, Laura was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, surrounded by a small pile of unpaid bills. She looked up, eyebrow raised. "What's that?" she asked. "Just a lottery ticket," Mark said with a grin, holding it up. She rolled her eyes. "You know these things never work right." "Of course," he said, slipping it under a magnet on the fridge. "But hey, what's life without a little gamble?" And there it stayed, forgotten, for days. Friday night came, and exhaustion won over curiosity. They didn't even watch the live draw. Saturday morning rolled in slow and lazy, with coffee brewing and the smell of toast filling the kitchen. Laura, half awake, clicked open the lottery website on her phone. She read the first number and froze, then the second, then the third dot. Her hands began to tremble. "Mark, come here." He walked in, rubbing his eyes. "What's wrong?" She shoved the phone toward him. They read through the numbers together, their breaths catching. One by one they matched. First disbelief, then the realization hit like a wave. They had all 6. Mark blinked, at the ticket on the fridge, then back at her. "Laura, do you know what this means?" She covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling up. "We were millionaires." The laughter came first, almost hysterical, then tears, then a quiet, stunned silence. They sat there at the kitchen table, the weight of their old life beginning to slip away. For years they had been trapped in routines they hated. Mark fixed cars for people who barely noticed him. Laura worked at a small office where her boss treated her like she was invisible. They'd always talked about traveling, about starting fresh somewhere far away. But dreams were cheap, and life had kept them chained down now. The chains were gone by Sunday afternoon. After hours of talking, they had made a decision. Monday morning they walked into their jobs, handed in their resignations without explanation, and left without looking back. But the real shock came when they told their families. They expected joy, maybe even celebration. Instead, they were met with something darker. Mark's brother accused him of hiding the ticket to avoid sharing the money. Laura's cousin, whom she hadn't spoken to in years, called and hinted at needing a small loan to pay off his debts. Even Laura's mother, who had rarely called before, began hinting that she deserved a share for raising her. The joy began to sour. Every phone call came with a request for money or a bitter remark about how they'd changed. Friends they hadn't heard from in years suddenly reappeared, speaking sweetly but circling like sharks. One night, sitting in their small living room, Laura whispered, "Mark, I can't live like this." He nodded slowly. "Me neither." And so, they made another decision. This one was even more drastic. Within 2 weeks, they quietly sold their modest house, closed their accounts, and booked 2 one-way tickets to a coastal village in another country, a place where no one knew their names or their bank balance. When they arrived, it felt like stepping into a dream. The ocean was just a short walk away. The locals smiled when they passed, and life moved at a pace that felt human. They bought a small cottage painted a faded blue, with a porch overlooking a tangle of wildflowers. Their days became slow and gentle. Morning coffee on the porch, fresh bread from the market, long walks on the beach where the waves whispered instead of roared, evenings watching the sky turn gold, then deep purple. For a while they thought they had found peace, but running away didn't erase everything. Some nights, Laura lay awake, wondering if her family hated her now. Mark found himself missing his little nephew, who used to visit him at the garage. The money had freed them from their old lives, but it had also built invisible walls between them and the people they once loved. One warm afternoon, as they wandered through the market, they met an older man named Raphael. He was selling fish from a small wooden stall, his skin tanned and weathered from years under the sun. He spoke with a gentle humor, slipping jokes into every conversation. Over time, they learned Raphael's story. He had been a fisherman all his life. His wife had passed away years ago, and he had no children. He lived alone in a small shack by the water. Yet he seemed happier than most people they had ever met. One evening, they sat with him on the beach eating fresh fish and bread while the stars came out. Raphael spoke quietly, watching the waves. "If money makes you lose people," he said, "it's not wealth. It's just a trade you didn't mean to make." The words lodged deep in their hearts. Over the next few months, Mark and Laura began to change how they lived. They reached out to a few family members, not the ones who had tried to take advantage of them, but the ones who had truly cared. They sent help quietly, without seeking credit. They started small projects in the village, fixing boats, buying books for the children, funding repairs for the community center. They learned how to use their fortune not to escape life, but to enrich it for themselves and for others. Years later, they would look back on that lottery ticket as both a blessing and a test. Winning had given them the freedom to choose, but also forced them to face the truth about relationships, trust, and what really matters. And in the end, they discovered that the real jackpot wasn't the millions they had won. It was the life. They had built a life filled with kindness, purpose, and connection. They became known in the village not as the rich couple, but as the ones who care, and that to them was worth far more than $148 million.